Chapter 1. The grind before Christmas. Roger Brinks stared at the glowing spreadsheet on his monitor, as if sheer willpower could make the numbers balance themselves. Outside his office window, the city twinkled with holiday lights, strings of gold and crimson draped across lampposts, store windows frosted with fake snow, and pedestrians bundled in scarves, laughing as they carried bags of gifts. It was Christmas Eve, and the world seemed drunk on joy. Roger was sober on deadlines. He rubbed his temples, feeling the dull throb of a headache that had been his constant companion since Monday. The office was silent now. Even the interns had fled hours ago. A half-eaten granola bar sat beside his keyboard. Its wrapper crinkled like a tiny flag of surrender. He hadn't tasted a proper meal since yesterday, but the quarterly report wouldn't finish itself. Just one more pivot table, he muttered, clicking through cells with mechanical precision. His voice sounded foreign in the empty room. At 34, Roger had everything he thought he wanted. A corner office, a salary that made his accountant nod approvingly, and a reputation for being the guy who never missed a deadline. He also had a calendar devoid of personal plans, a fridge stocked with bottled water and takeout containers, and a phone that buzzed only for work emails. Friends had stopped inviting him to holiday parties years ago. Family gatherings were maybe next time promises he never kept. He told himself it didn't matter. Success was its own kind of company. But tonight, as the clock on his monitor ticked toward midnight, Roger felt the hollowness pressing in. He glanced at the small artificial tree in the corner of his office, a half-hearted attempt by the receptionist to spread cheer. Its plastic needles sagged under the weight of two mismatched ornaments. Roger hadn't bothered to plug in the lights. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. The leather creaked like an old man's knees. Outside, a car horn blared, followed by laughter. Somewhere, people were clinking glasses, kissing under mistletoe, making memories. Roger was making formulas. His phone buzzed. For a fleeting second, hope flickered. Maybe someone remembered him tonight, but it was just an email from his boss. Appreciate your dedication, Roger. Let's touch base first thing Monday. No Merry Christmas. No warmth. Just another reminder that his life was a series of bullet points. Roger closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. He thought of his childhood Christmases, brief flashes of color and sound. His mother humming carols while frosting cookies, his father untangling lights with theatrical sighs, the smell of pine and cinnamon. And Emily, always Emily. She lived 2 streets over, with a laugh that could melt frost and a smile that made 12-year-old Roger forget how to breathe. They'd shared sled rides and secret jokes, and once, just once, she'd kissed his cheek under a string of lights. Then life happened. College, careers, distance. He hadn't seen her in years. Roger swallowed hard, pushing the memory away. Nostalgia was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had work to finish. But his eyelids betrayed him, growing heavier with each blink. The spreadsheet blurred, numbers swimming like fish in a murky pond. He told himself he'd rest for 5 minutes, just 5, then power through. He didn't hear the hum of the city anymore, didn't feel the chill of the office air. As his head sank onto his folded arms, the world dissolved into darkness, soft, velvety, and strangely warm. And then, the bells began to ring. Chapter 2. The first dream, Christmas past. Roger opened his eyes to a world drenched in color and warmth. For a moment, he thought he'd fallen asleep at his desk, and someone had turned up the thermostat. But the air smelled of cinnamon and pine, not stale coffee and printer ink. The hum of fluorescent lights was gone, replaced by the crackle of a fire and the faint strains of carols drifting from an old radio. He was standing in his childhood living room. The wallpaper was the same faded floral pattern his mother had never gotten around to replacing. Stockings hung from the mantel, bulging with candy canes and chocolate coins. A tree stood proudly in the corner, its branches heavy with ornaments. Some glass, some paper, all familiar. Roger's breath caught when he saw the crooked star on top, the one he'd insisted on placing himself every year, even when he was too short to reach without wobbling on a chair. What they? His voice trailed off as he looked down at himself. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit or polished shoes. Instead, he was in flannel pajamas, the kind with cartoon reindeer, and his feet were bare against the worn carpet. He flexed his toes, half expecting the illusion to shatter, but the fibers tickled his skin just like they used to. Roger, come on, sleepyhead. A voice rang out from the kitchen, bright, musical, achingly familiar. His mother. He turned, and there she was, bustling around in her apron, hair pinned up, cheeks flushed from the oven's heat. She looked younger than he remembered, her laugh lines softer, her movements brisk and sure. She carried a tray of cinnamon rolls, steam curling upward like tiny ghosts of sugar and spice. Roger's throat tightened. He wanted to run to her, to wrap his arms around her and never let go, but his legs felt rooted. He could only watch as she set the tray on the coffee table and called out again. Emily. Roger's finally up. Come help me with these. Emily. The name hit him like a snowball to the chest, cold shock followed by a rush of warmth. He turned toward the doorway just as she appeared, and for a second, the world seemed to tilt. She was 15 again, all long legs and tangled hair, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big and jeans frayed at the knees. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her smile, God, that smile, was the same one that had haunted him for decades. She carried a box of ornaments, her gloved hands clumsy as she tried to peel them off. "Morning, Roger," she said, grinning as if they'd seen each other yesterday. "Nice pajamas." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He wanted to tell her everything, that he'd thought about her every Christmas since, that he'd wondered what her life was like, that he'd imagined 1,000 versions of this moment. But all he managed was a strangled, "Hey!" Emily laughed, the sound like sleigh bells tumbling down a hill. She crossed the room and plopped down beside him on the couch, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something fruity, like apples. She nudged his shoulder with hers. "You gonna help me hang these, or just sit there looking dazed?" Roger stared at the box in her lap, at the ornaments wrapped in tissue paper. His fingers itched to touch them, to feel the smooth glass and the weight of memory. He reached for one, a tiny snowman with a chipped hat, and held it like a relic. "This was yours," he murmured. "You made this in art class." Emily tilted her head, surprised. "Wow, you remember that?" "I remember everything," he said softly, and for a moment, the truth of it hung between them like mistletoe. But then his mother swept in, clapping her hands. "Come on, you two. Tree's not gonna decorate itself." The next hour unfolded like a dream within a dream. Roger found himself laughing, really laughing, as he and Emily tangled in strings of lights, their fingers brushing more than once. They sang along to carols, off-key and shameless. His mother fussed over the cinnamon rolls, pretending not to notice when Emily flicked a bit of tinsel at him, and he retaliated with a snowflake ornament. It was perfect, too perfect, because deep down Roger knew it wasn't real. He knew his mother wasn't alive anymore, that Emily wasn't 15, that this house had been sold years ago. The knowledge sat heavy in his chest, a cold stone beneath the warmth. He wanted to stay, to freeze this moment like a photograph, but the edges of the room were already blurring, colors bleeding into shadow. Emily turned to him, her smile softening. "Don't forget, Roger," she said, her voice echoing strangely, as if coming from far away. "Christmas isn't about what you have. It's about who you share it with." He reached for her hand, desperate to hold on, but his fingers closed on air. The living room dissolved, the tree melting into darkness, the laughter fading like a song on a broken radio. And then he was falling through blackness, through silence, until another sound began to rise. Bells again, louder this time, mingled with voices and the distant hum of traffic. Roger opened his eyes. Chapter 3. The second dream, Christmas present. Roger blinked against a burst of light so sharp, it felt like stepping out of a cave. The darkness of his first dream had vanished, replaced by a swirl of color and motion. He was standing in the middle of a bustling town square, the kind that looked like it had been plucked from a holiday postcard. Snow dusting the cobblestones, strings of lights zigzagging overhead, and a towering Christmas tree glittering like a jewel in the center. The air was alive with sound, laughter, carols, the rhythmic clang of a bell as a volunteer shook a donation bucket near a red kettle. Children darted past in puffy coats, their cheeks pink, their mittens sticky from candy canes. The scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with hot cocoa and something sweet, gingerbread. Maybe. It was Christmas in full bloom, and Roger felt like an intruder in a world that had forgotten him. He looked down at himself. No pajamas this time, thank God, but not his usual armor of a suit either. He wore jeans, a wool sweater, and boots dusted with snow. His breath puffed out in little clouds as he turned slowly, trying to make sense of it all. Then he saw her, Emily, not 15 now but grown, radiantly, heartbreakingly grown. She stood near a booth draped in garlands, her hair tucked into a knit hat, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She was laughing at something a volunteer said, her gloved hands busy arranging toys on a table marked Holiday Charity Drive. Behind her, a banner fluttered in the wind, making spirits bright, one family at a time. Roger's chest tightened. She looked happy. Not the brittle, polite happiness he saw at office parties, but the kind that glowed from the inside out. Her smile was the same, though wide and warm, the kind that made you believe in things you'd stopped believing in. And then he noticed the little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5, bundled in a pink coat with a hood trimmed in faux fur. She was tugging at Emily's sleeve, pointing at a stuffed reindeer on the table. Emily bent down, her laughter softening into tenderness as she handed the toy over. The girl hugged it like treasure, her eyes shining. Roger felt something shift inside him, a pang so sharp it was almost physical. He didn't know the child's name, but he knew who she was. Emily's daughter. The life Emily had built without him. A life full of color and noise and love, while his own was a grayscale spreadsheet. He took a step forward, then froze. What was he supposed to say? "Hi, remember me? The guy who vanished into work for a decade?" He imagined her polite smile, the awkward small talk, the inevitable glance at her watch. He'd missed his chance years ago. But the dream had other plans. Emily looked up and saw him. For a heartbeat, her expression was blank, as if her mind was flipping through old photo albums. Then her eyes widened, and her mouth curved into a smile that made Roger's knees feel like melting snow. "Roger Brinks?" she called, her voice carrying easily over the hum of the crowd. "Is that you?" He swallowed hard, forcing his legs to move. "Emily," he said, and his voice cracked like a teenager's. "Smooth, Brinks. Real smooth." She laughed, and the sound wrapped around him like a scarf. "Wow, it's been, what, 15 years? 20. Something like that," he managed, shoving his hands into his pockets so she wouldn't see them shaking. "You look great." Emily arched an eyebrow, amused. "Thanks, you too. Very festive." She gestured at his sweater, which Roger now noticed was patterned with tiny snowflakes. He had no idea where it came from, but he was grateful it wasn't his usual charcoal suit. Before he could reply, the little girl peeked out from behind Emily's legs, clutching the reindeer. Her eyes were big and curious, the same shade of green as Emily's. "And who's this?" Roger asked, crouching slightly. "This is Sophie," Emily said, smoothing the girl's hat. "My daughter." Sophie gave him a solemn look, then whispered, "Do you like reindeer?" Roger smiled. "I love reindeer, especially ones with pink bows." Sophie grinned, the solemnity melting away, and Roger felt something warm bloom in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Connection. Simple, pure, and terrifying. Emily straightened, brushing snow from her coat. "So what brings you here? I didn't peg you as the holiday charity type." Roger hesitated. What could he say? "Oh, nothing much. Just a supernatural intervention reminding me I've wasted my life." Instead, he shrugged. "Thought I'd get some fresh air. See what Christmas looks like outside an office." Emily's smile softened. "Well, you picked the right spot. We've been running this drive for 5 years now. Toys, coats, food, anything to make the season brighter for families who need it." Roger glanced at the tables piled high with donations, at the volunteers laughing as they sorted gifts. It was chaos, but the kind that hummed with purpose. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and warm, and for the first time in years he wanted in. "That's amazing," he said quietly, and he meant it. Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You should stick around. We could use an extra pair of hands." Roger opened his mouth to agree, because of course he would, but the world was already shifting. The snow blurred into streaks of white, the voices fading like distant echoes. Emily's face wavered, her smile dissolving into mist. "Wait," Roger reached for her, for Sophie, for the sound of bells and laughter, but his fingers closed on nothing. The square vanished, swallowed by darkness. And then came the silence, heavy, absolute, until the bells began again. Chapter 4. The third dream, Christmas future. Roger knew it was a dream before he even opened his eyes. The air was too still, too heavy, like a room holding its breath. When he finally looked around, the world was gray, muted, lifeless, as if someone had drained all the color and left only shadows behind. He was in an apartment, not his current one, but something smaller, colder. The walls were bare except for a single calendar, its pages curling at the edges. A thin tree stood in the corner, undecorated except for a string of lights that flickered weakly, like they were tired of trying. The silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of a refrigerator and the distant wail of wind against the windows. Roger walked slowly, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor. There were no stockings, no laughter, no smell of cinnamon rolls, just the faint scent of dust and loneliness. On the coffee table sat a plate with 2 cookies, store-bought, still in their plastic wrap. Beside them, a single card, season's greetings from the team. No signatures, just printed names. He felt the weight of years settle on his shoulders. His hands looked older, veins more pronounced, skin thinner. His reflection in the darkened window confirmed it. Gray at the temples, lines etched deep around his mouth. His eyes were tired, hollow. This was his future, a future where work had won. Roger sank onto the couch, the cushion stiff and unyielding. He tried to imagine the sound of laughter here, the warmth of voices, but the silence swallowed every attempt. He thought of Emily, her smile, her laugh, the way her daughter's eyes had sparkled, and the ache in his chest deepened until it was almost unbearable. "Is this it?" he whispered. "Is this what I traded everything for?" The room didn't answer. It didn't need to. He closed his eyes, wishing for the dream to end. But when he opened them again, the scene had changed. The apartment was gone. In its place was a living room bathed in golden light. A fire crackled in the hearth, throwing shadows that danced across walls adorned with garlands and family photos. A tree stood proudly in the corner, its branches heavy with ornaments, some new, some clearly handmade. Beneath it, a sea of wrapping paper and ribbons spilled across the floor like confetti. And there they were, Emily, laughing as she tried to wrestle a bow onto a box too big for its own good. Sophie, older now, maybe 8, giggling as she tore into a package, her hair a wild halo around her face. And Roger was there too, kneeling on the rug, his hands clumsy as he tried to assemble a dollhouse while Sophie offered helpful instructions that made no sense. "Uncle Roger, that piece goes upside down," she declared, pointing with authority. Roger chuckled. Pretty sure the roof goes on top, kiddo? Emily rolled her eyes, smiling. You two are hopeless. Roger looked at her then, really looked, and felt something bloom inside him, warm and steady. She was older, yes, but still radiant, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she laughed. There was a softness to her now, a grace born of years and resilience. And she was looking at him like he belonged here, like he wasn't just a guest in this moment, but a part of it. He wanted to freeze time to hold this vision forever. The sound of Sophie's laughter, the glow of the fire, the way Emily's hand brushed his arm as she passed him a mug of cocoa. It was everything he'd been missing, everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. And then, just as his heart began to settle into the rhythm of it, the edges of the room started to blur. The colors bled into shadow. The laughter faded like a song on a broken record. No, Roger whispered, reaching out. Please, not yet. Emily turned to him, her smile soft, her voice gentle as a snowfall. It's not too late, Roger, but you have to choose. The words echoed, stretching, twisting, until they became the toll of bells, deep, resonant, pulling him backward through darkness. Roger gasped and sat up. He was in his office again, the glow of his monitor casting harsh light across the papers strewn on his desk. The clock read 3:07 a.m. outside. The city was silent, the holiday lights still twinkling like distant stars. Roger pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the hammer of his heartbeat. His mouth was dry, his head spinning, but one thought burned clear and bright through the fog. He couldn't let that future happen. Not the gray apartment, not the silence, not the store-bought cookies. He wanted the firelight, the laughter, Emily. Roger swung his legs off the desk, his shoes thudding against the floor. For the first time in years, he didn't care about the spreadsheet waiting on his screen. He didn't care about Monday's meeting or the email from his boss. He cared about one thing, one person, and the life he'd glimpsed like a star through clouds. He grabbed his coat, his keys, and bolted for the door. Chapter 5. The decision. Roger's shoes squeaked against the marble lobby floor as he strode out of the building, the echo of his own footsteps chasing him like a reprimand. The glass doors parted with a hiss, and the cold night air slapped his face, sharp and bracing. For the first time in years, he welcomed it. It felt like a wake-up call, a reminder that he was alive, that he could still change. The city was quiet now, the frenzy of last-minute shoppers long gone. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the glow of street lamps, settling on Roger's coat as he walked toward his car. His breath puffed out in clouds, mingling with the steam rising from manhole covers. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, deep and solemn, as if marking the start of something sacred. Roger gripped his keys, his mind racing. He had no plan, just a burning certainty that he couldn't go back upstairs, couldn't sit in that sterile office pretending numbers mattered more than people. He thought of Emily's smile, of Sophie clutching that stuffed reindeer, of the firelight in that dream that felt more real than anything in his life. He wanted that warmth, needed it, but wanting wasn't enough. He had to act. He slid into his car, the leather seats cold against his back, and started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed. 3:18 a.m. Christmas morning was hours away. He could go home, sleep, pretend this epiphany was just a side effect of exhaustion. Or he could do something reckless, something brave. Roger grinned, a shaky, unfamiliar grin, and pulled out into the empty street. The drive to his apartment was a blur of snow and streetlights. He barely remembered parking, climbing the stairs, fumbling with the lock. Inside, the place looked exactly as he'd left it. Neat, impersonal, a showroom masquerading as a home. The sight made his stomach twist. He shrugged off his coat and headed straight for the closet. Somewhere in the back, behind the suits and pressed shirts, was a box he hadn't touched in years. He dragged it out, dust puffing into the air, and pried it open. Christmas decorations. Not many. Just a tangle of lights, a few ornaments, and a ceramic Santa missing an arm. He stared at them, memories flooding back. His mother humming carols, his father cursing at tangled wires, Emily laughing as she stuck bows on his head. Roger swallowed hard and plugged in the lights. They flickered weakly, then glowed, casting a soft halo across the room. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He spent the next hour transforming his apartment from a mausoleum into something resembling cheer. Lights draped across the windows, ornaments perched on shelves, the maimed Santa presiding over the coffee table like a battle-scarred general. When he was done, he stepped back and surveyed the scene. It was imperfect, messy, human. Roger smiled. But decorating wasn't enough. He needed to see Emily, needed to tell her what exactly? That he'd had a trio of supernatural dreams and realized his life was a hollow shell? That he wanted to be part of hers, if she'd let him? He groaned, running a hand through his hair. He sounded insane even in his own head. But the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through contacts. Emily's name wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. They hadn't spoken in years. He hesitated, then opened social media, fingers flying. It didn't take long to find her profile. A photo of her and Sophie at last year's charity event, both grinning under a canopy of lights. Roger stared at the picture, his chest tightening. He could send a message. Something simple. Hey, long time no see. Merry Christmas. But that felt hollow, cowardly. He wanted more than words on a screen. He wanted to show up. Roger checked the charities page. They were hosting a Christmas morning breakfast for families in need, 8 a.m. at the community center. Volunteers welcome. Perfect. He set his alarm for 6, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally claimed him. The alarm shrieked like a drill sergeant, and Roger bolted upright, heart pounding. For a split second, he wondered if he dreamed the whole thing. The visions, the decision, the resolve. But then he saw the lights twinkling across his window and remembered. He showered, shaved, and dressed in record time, pulling on a sweater that didn't scream corporate drone. He even found a scarf buried in a drawer, though he had no idea how to tie it properly. After a quick stop for coffee and a box of pastries, because showing up empty-handed felt wrong, he headed to the community center. The parking lot was already buzzing when he arrived. Volunteers unloaded boxes from vans, their breath puffing in the frosty air. Laughter spilled from the open doors, mingling with the scent of pancakes and syrup. Roger hesitated, nerves jangling. He felt like a kid on the first day of school, clutching his pastries like a security blanket. Then he saw her. Emily stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, her hat pulled low against the cold. She was giving instructions to a group of teenagers, her voice brisk but warm. When she turned and spotted Roger, her eyes widened in surprise. "Roger," she said, stepping forward. "Wow, I didn't expect to see you here." He held up the pastry box like a peace offering. "Thought I'd help out, if you'll have me." Emily blinked, then smiled. A slow, genuine smile that made Roger's pulse trip over itself. "We'll definitely have you. Come on in." The warmth hit him like a wave as he stepped inside. The hall was a riot of color and sound. Tables draped in red and green, kids darting between chairs, volunteers flipping pancakes on griddles. Roger felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for years. Emily led him to a table stacked with plates. "Think you can handle serving breakfast?" Roger grinned. "I can handle spreadsheets. How hard can pancakes be?" Famous last words. Within minutes, he was in over his head, syrup spills, kids clamoring for seconds, a near disaster involving a tower of cups. Emily laughed every time he fumbled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Sophie appeared halfway through, clutching her reindeer and announcing, "You're funny." Roger bowed theatrically. "I aim to please." By the time the breakfast wound down, Roger was sticky, exhausted, and happier than he'd been in years. And he wasn't leaving without telling Emily how he felt. Chapter 6. The first encounter. The last of the syrup-sticky plates clattered into the bin, and Roger exhaled like a man who had just survived a natural disaster. His sweater bore the evidence of battle. 2 syrup stains, a smear of butter, and what he suspected was pancake batter on his sleeve. He glanced around the community hall, now quieter, the chaos replaced by the hum of volunteers stacking chairs and wiping tables. Emily was across the room, laughing with a group of teens as they boxed up leftover pastries. Her hat had slipped back, revealing a tumble of chestnut hair, and her cheeks were flushed from hours of work. Roger felt that now familiar tug in his chest, the one that had started in his dreams and refused to let go. He wiped his hands on a napkin, squared his shoulders, and walked toward her. His heart thudded like a drumline, and for a ridiculous second he considered turning back. But then Emily looked up, her eyes catching his, and smiled. "Survived the breakfast rush?" she teased, handing off a box to a volunteer. "Barely," Roger said, grinning. "I think I owe 3 kids therapy after the great syrup spill of 8:15. Emily laughed, the sound warm and easy. "You did fine. Better than most first-timers." Roger raised an eyebrow. "Is that your polite way of saying I was a disaster?" "Not a disaster," she said, tilting her head. "More like comic relief." Roger chuckled, feeling some of the tension ease. "I'll take that. Beats being the guy who hides in the corner." Emily's smile softened. "Honestly, I'm glad you came. It's been, what, years?" "Too many," Roger admitted. He hesitated, then added, "You look great, Emily. And this," he gestured around the hall. "This is incredible. You've built something amazing here." Her eyes flickered with pride. "It's a lot of work, but worth it. Families need this, especially now." Roger nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. While he'd been buried in spreadsheets, Emily had been out here making a difference. He wanted to say that, wanted to tell her how much he admired her. But before he could, a small voice piped up. "Mom! Mom! Look!" Sophie barreled toward them, clutching a balloon animal that looked vaguely like a dog. Her coat was unzipped, her hat askew, and her grin wide enough to light the room. Emily crouched, steadying the balloon before it popped. "Wow, sophomore. That's impressive." Sophie turned to Roger, eyes bright. "Do you like dogs?" Roger crouched too, meeting her gaze. "Love them, especially ones that look like, He squinted at the balloon. "Modern art." Sophie giggled, the sound bubbling like a brook. "It's a dog. You're funny." Roger grinned. I try. Emily shook her head, amused. She's going to adopt you if you keep that up. Roger's heart did a somersault. I wouldn't mind, he said lightly, though the truth behind the words startled him. Sophie tugged his sleeve. Are you coming tomorrow? We're doing presents. Roger glanced at Emily, who looked surprised but not displeased. Tomorrow. The gift drive, Emily explained. We wrap and deliver presents to families. It's kind of a big deal. Roger didn't hesitate. I'll be here. Emily's brows lifted. You sure? It's a lot of work. Roger smiled. I think I can handle it, as long as there's no syrup involved. Emily laughed again, and Roger felt the sound settle in his bones like warmth after a long winter. They talked for another 20 minutes about the charity, about Sophie's obsession with reindeer, about the best way to keep Coco from scalding your tongue. Roger found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Emily was easy to talk to, funny, sharp, grounded, and Sophie was a whirlwind of questions and giggles, darting between them like a tiny ambassador of joy. When it was time to leave, Roger felt a pang of reluctance. He wanted to linger, to stretch this moment into forever, but volunteers were packing up, and Emily was needed elsewhere. Thanks for helping, she said, slipping off her gloves. Really, it meant a lot. Roger met her gaze, his voice steady. I'm glad I came, and I'll be back tomorrow. Emily smiled. A real smile, warm and unguarded. Good. We'll save you some tape. Roger chuckled, then turned toward the door, Sophie waving like a windmill behind him. As he stepped into the cold, the bells from the nearby church began to ring, deep and resonant, and for the first time in years, Roger felt like they were ringing for him. Chapter 7. Missteps and Comedy. Roger arrived at the community center the next morning armed with two things: determination and a box of donuts. He figured if his gift-wrapping skills were as questionable as his pancake-serving abilities, at least he could bribe the volunteers with sugar. The hall was already buzzing when he walked in. Tables were piled high with toys, books, and winter coats. Rolls of wrapping paper unfurled like colorful rivers across every surface, and the air smelled faintly of tape and cocoa. Christmas music played from a speaker in the corner, cheerful, relentless, the kind that made Roger feel like he should be wearing an elf hat. Emily spotted him almost immediately. She was in jeans and a red sweater today, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a pencil tucked behind one ear like a badge of authority. She waved him over, her smile bright enough to cut through the chaos. You came, she said, sounding genuinely pleased. Told you I would, Roger replied, holding up the donut box. And I brought reinforcements. Emily laughed. Smart man. Sugar keeps morale high. Roger grinned, feeling that now familiar warmth bloom in his chest. So, where do you need me? Emily handed him a roll of snowflake pattern paper and a pair of scissors that looked suspiciously dangerous. Gift wrapping station. Think you can handle it? Roger eyed the mountain of toys waiting to be wrapped. Define handle. Emily smirked. Just make sure the paper ends up on the gift, not you. Roger quickly discovered that wrapping presents was an art form, and he was not an artist. His first attempt, a board game, looked like it had been attacked by a raccoon. The paper tore in 3 places, the tape stuck to his fingers, and the bow ended up dangling like a limp noodle. He stared at the mess, horrified. This is abstract, he muttered. Emily appeared at his elbow, biting back a laugh. Wow, that's creative. Roger groaned. Don't sugarcoat it. This is a crime against Christmas. Emily grinned, her eyes dancing. Here, let me show you. She leaned in, her hands brushing his as she smoothed the paper. Roger caught the scent of her shampoo, something warm and spicy, and his brain promptly short-circuited. See? She said, folding the edges with practiced ease. Tight corners, clean lines. Roger nodded, trying to focus on the paper and not the fact that her shoulder was inches from his. Got it. Tight corners, clean lines, no raccoons. Emily laughed, and the sound did something dangerous to his pulse. Exactly. Determined to redeem himself, Roger tackled a stuffed bear next. Seemed simple, soft, round, no sharp edges. How hard could it be? Answer very. By the time he was done, the bear looked like it had been mummified. Layers of paper crisscrossed its body, tape glinting like armor. Roger stared at it, then at Emily, who was valiantly trying not to laugh. Okay, he said deadpan. This one's avant-garde. Emily lost it, laughter spilling out like bells. Roger, you're hopeless. Roger grinned, oddly proud of making her laugh. Hopeless but committed. Sophie appeared then, clutching a roll of glittery ribbon. You need help, she announced solemnly. Roger bowed. I accept your expertise, oh wise one. Sophie proceeded to tie a bow around the bear's neck, her tongue poking out in concentration. When she finished, she stepped back, hands on hips. There. Perfect. Roger admired the result. You're a genius, Sophie beamed. Mom says I'm creative. Roger shot Emily a playful look. She gets it from you. Emily's cheeks pinked, and for a moment, something warm flickered between them. Something that made Roger's breath catch. The morning rolled on in a blur of paper, tape, and laughter. Roger improved marginally. His gifts were still lumpy, but at least they resembled presents now. He and Emily fell into an easy rhythm, teasing each other over crooked folds and runaway ribbons. Sophie flitted between them like a spark of joy, occasionally declaring herself quality control and rejecting any package that didn't meet her exacting standards. At one point, Roger tried to cut a piece of paper and somehow launched the scissors across the table. They skidded to a stop inches from a volunteer's coffee cup. Roger froze. "Nobody saw that," he said quickly. Emily smirked. "Oh, we all saw that." Roger groaned. "I'm never living this down, am I?" "Not a chance," Emily said, her eyes twinkling. By noon, the tables were stacked with neatly wrapped gifts. Well, mostly neat. Roger's contributions were distinctive, but Emily assured him they had character. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a mercy killing, but he'd take it. As volunteers began loading boxes into vans, Roger found himself lingering near Emily. He wanted to say something real, about how much he admired what she was doing, about how being here felt like waking up after years of sleep, about how he didn't want her to be just a dream. But the words tangled in his throat, heavy with fear. What if she didn't feel the same? What if she saw him as nothing more than a guy who showed up with donuts and bad rapping skills? Emily turned then, catching his gaze. Her smile was soft, her eyes warm. "Thanks for today, Roger. Really. You were fun. It wasn't much, but it was something." Roger smiled back, his voice steady even as his heart raced. "I'm glad I came, and if you need help again, I'm around." Emily's lips curved. "I'll hold you to that." Roger nodded, feeling the weight of possibility settle on his shoulders like a gift he hadn't expected. For the first time in years, he didn't dread tomorrow. He looked forward to it. Chapter 8. Opening up, the vans had rolled out, the tables were cleared, and the hum of voices had faded into a soft, companionable quiet. The community center smelled faintly of cocoa and pine, and the last strands of tinsel glimmered in the afternoon light like forgotten confetti. Roger lingered near the doorway, unsure if he should leave or wait. His hands were jammed into his coat pockets, his heart thudding like a drum in a distant parade. Emily was still there, of course, because Emily was always the last to leave. She stood by the donation table, checking lists, her pencil tapping against the clipboard in a rhythm that matched the music playing faintly from her phone. Sophie had wandered off to a corner with a coloring book, humming to herself as she filled in a snowman with neon pink. Roger watched Emily for a moment, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her ponytail swayed when she moved. She looked tired, but in that beautiful, purposeful way, like someone who had poured herself into something that mattered. He felt a pang of admiration so sharp it almost hurt. He cleared his throat. "Need a hand?" Emily glanced up, startled, then smiled. "You're still here." Roger shrugged, trying for casual. "Figured I'd stick around. Make sure you don't drown in paperwork." Emily laughed softly, setting the clipboard down. "I wouldn't say no to company." Roger crossed the room, his steps slow, deliberate. When he reached her, he leaned against the edge of the table, close enough to catch the faint scent of cinnamon from her sweater. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was warm, like the pause between verses of a familiar song. "You do a lot," Roger said finally, his voice low. All of this, it's incredible." Emily's smile was small but genuine. "It's a team effort." "Sure," Roger said. "But you're the heart of it." Her eyes flicked to his, and for a second, he thought he saw something soften there. Something that made his pulse trip over itself. "I just want people to feel like Christmas still matters," she said quietly. "Even when life gets hard." Roger nodded, his throat tight. "You've done that. More than you know." Emily looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of the clipboard. It wasn't easy starting over. After Sophie's dad left, she stopped, the words hanging like fragile ornaments. Then she shook her head, forcing a smile. "Anyway, this keeps me busy." Roger's chest ached. He wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to tell her she deserved more than busy. She deserved joy. She deserved someone who showed up, not just for the holidays but for everything. Instead, he said softly, "You're stronger than anyone I know." Emily laughed, but it was a quiet, almost shy sound. "I don't always feel that way." Roger hesitated, then took a breath. "I know what that's like." Her gaze returned to him, curious. "You?" Roger nodded, his voice rougher now. "I've spent years hiding behind work, telling myself success was enough, that I didn't need this." He gestured vaguely at the hall, at the laughter that had filled it hours ago. "But last night, I realized something. I've been missing the point." Emily tilted her head, her eyes searching his. "What point?" Roger swallowed hard. "That life isn't about spreadsheets and deadlines. It's about people. About moments like this." He paused, then added, almost a whisper, "About you." The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. Roger's heart slammed against his ribs, waiting for her to laugh, to deflect, to tell him he was reading too much into things. But Emily didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She just stood there, her eyes wide, her breath catching like a candle flickering in a draft. "Roger," she began, then stopped, as if the rest of the sentence had tangled in her throat. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I'm not asking for anything," he said softly. "Not yet. I just needed you to know." Emily's lips parted, her eyes shimmering with something he couldn't name. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both. Then Sophie's voice rang out from across the room, bright and oblivious. "Mom, look, I made the snowman purple." Emily blinked, the spell breaking, and turned toward her daughter with a laugh that sounded a little shaky. "That's a very creative, sophomore." Roger smiled, stepping back, giving her space. He didn't regret saying it, not for a second, because for the first time in years he felt like he'd told the truth. They finished the cleanup together, their conversation lighter now, about Sophie's artistic choices, about the volunteer who accidentally glued a bow to his sleeve. But beneath the laughter, something new hummed between them, quiet and electric. When Roger finally left, the sky was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that made the snow sparkle like diamonds. He walked to his car feeling lighter than he had in years, his breath puffing out in clouds that seemed to carry a promise. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Chapter 9. The setback. Roger woke up on Christmas Eve feeling lighter than air. For the first time in years, his alarm didn't feel like a summons to battle. It felt like a starting bell for something good. He brewed coffee, humming under his breath, and glanced at the string of lights he'd hung the night before. They blinked cheerfully in the gray morning, a reminder that change wasn't just possible. It was happening. He checked his phone, expecting maybe a text from Emily, though he knew that was wishful thinking. Instead, his screen lit up with a name that made his stomach drop. Martin Boss. Roger stared at the notification, dread curling like smoke. He swiped it open. "Need you to jump on a call ASAP. Client issue. Critical. Don't care if it's Christmas Eve. This can't wait." Roger's pulse spiked. He typed back before he could think. "Give me 10 minutes. As soon as he hit send, regret slammed into him. 10 minutes? What was he doing? He had plans, real plans. Emily had invited him to help deliver gifts this morning. Sophie had practically demanded his presence. He'd promised he'd be there. And now Martin was pulling him back into the vortex. Roger paced his apartment, coffee forgotten on the counter. He could ignore the message. He could turn off his phone, walk out the door, and never look back. But the old reflexes, the ones drilled into him by years of corporate loyalty, clawed at his resolve. Critical issue. Client meltdown. Career suicide if you bail. He raked a hand through his hair, muttering, "Come on, Brinks. You said you were done with this." The phone buzzed again. "Waiting on you." Roger cursed under his breath and grabbed his laptop. The call was a nightmare. A client screaming about numbers that didn't add up, Martin barking orders like a general in a war zone. Roger slipped into autopilot, his fingers flying across spreadsheets, his voice calm even as his insides churned. He kept glancing at the clock. 8:15, 8:30, 9 o'clock. Every tick was a nail in the coffin of his promise. By the time the fire was out, it was nearly 10. Roger closed his laptop with a snap, his jaw tight. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Emily, 2 texts. "Everything okay? We're heading out soon. Thought you were coming?" Roger stared at the messages, guilt slamming into him like a freight train. He typed back, "I'm so sorry. Got pulled into work. Can I meet you later?" No reply. He drove to the community center anyway, hoping he could catch them before they left. But when he arrived, the parking lot was empty except for a dusting of snow. The hall was dark, the wreath on the door swaying in the wind like a reproach. Roger sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the weight of every bad choice he'd ever made pressing down on him. He'd promised himself he wouldn't let this happen. He'd sworn he was done letting work steal his life. And yet here he was, alone again because he couldn't say no. He thought of Emily loading gifts into vans, her smile fading when he didn't show. He thought of Sophie asking if he'd come, her little face lighting up with trust. He'd broken that trust. And for what? A spreadsheet. A client who wouldn't remember his name in a week. Roger slammed his fist against the steering wheel, the sound sharp in the silence. "Enough," he muttered. "Enough." He drove aimlessly for a while, the city blurring past in streaks of gray and white. His thoughts were a storm. Regret, anger, fear. Was this who he was? A man who talked about change but never followed through? A man who let the best things slip through his fingers because he was too scared to choose them? By the time he pulled into his apartment lot, the sky was darkening, streaked with violet and gold. Christmas lights blinked in windows, mocking him with their cheer. Roger sat in his car, staring at the glow, and felt something inside him harden. He wasn't going to let this be the end. He'd missed the gift delivery, yes. He'd screwed up, but he wasn't done fighting. He grabbed his phone and typed a message to Emily. "I messed up today. I'm sorry. Please let me make it right. Where can I find you tonight?" He hit send and waited, his breath fogging the windshield. Minutes crawled by. Then his phone buzzed. "We're at the gala. Community center. Starts at 7. Roger stared at the screen, his pulse kicking up. The gala, the big event Emily had mentioned in passing, the one that capped off the charity drive. He hadn't planned on going. He didn't even own a suit that wasn't corporate gray. But he was going. No excuses. No hesitation. He tore through his closet like a man possessed. The navy blazer he hadn't worn in years still fit. Mostly. A white shirt, a decent tie, polished shoes. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. Not the workaholic drone, but a man on a mission. Before leaving, he grabbed something else. His checkbook. Money wasn't everything, but if he could help Emily's cause in a real way, he would. Not as a grand gesture to impress her, though God knew he wanted her to see he cared, but because it mattered. Because she mattered. The community center was transformed when he arrived. Strings of lights draped from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over tables dressed in crimson and gold. A tree glittered in the corner, its ornaments catching the light like tiny stars. People milled about in their holiday best, laughter mingling with the strains of a live jazz trio. Roger stepped inside, his heart thudding. He scanned the room, searching for her, and then he saw her. Emily stood near the stage, talking to a volunteer, her red dress simple but stunning. Her hair was loose now, tumbling over her shoulders, and when she laughed, the sound carried across the room like music. Roger swallowed hard and started toward her. Chapter 10. The grand gesture. Roger paused just inside the doorway, the hum of conversation washing over him like a tide. The gala was everything he'd imagined and more. Warm light spilling across polished floors, tables draped in crimson and gold, a tree glittering in the corner like a beacon of joy. People laughed, clinked glasses, exchanged hugs. It was the kind of scene Roger had spent years avoiding, telling himself he didn't need it. Tonight, he wanted nothing more. He spotted Emily near the stage, her red dress catching the glow of the lights, her hair tumbling over her shoulders like a ribbon of chestnut silk. She was talking to a volunteer, her smile easy, her laugh soft and musical. Roger's breath caught. For a moment, he just stood there, drinking her in, feeling the weight of everything he'd almost lost pressing against his ribs. Then he moved. Emily turned as he approached, surprise flickering across her face. "Roger." Her voice was warm, but there was an edge to it, a question, maybe even a challenge. Roger swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I missed this morning," he said, his voice low but steady. "I got pulled into work. I should have said no. I didn't, and that's on me." Emily studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his. "You promised," she said softly. Not accusing, just stating a fact. Somehow that was worse. "I know," Roger said. "And I hate that I let you down. I've spent years letting work run my life, and I told myself I was done with that. Today, I slipped. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving." Emily's gaze softened, but her silence stretched like a taut string. Roger felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the check he'd written before leaving his apartment. He hadn't planned to make a show of it, but maybe this was the moment. He pulled it out and held it toward her. "This is for the charity," he said quietly. "It's not about me trying to impress you. It's because what you're doing matters, and I want to help." Emily glanced at the check, then back at him. Her brows lifted slightly. "Roger, this is generous." Roger shook his head. "It's not enough. Not compared to what you've built here, but it's a start." Emily's lips curved into a small smile, hesitant, but real. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." Roger exhaled, relief washing through him like warm light. But he wasn't done. Not yet. The music shifted then, the jazz trio sliding into a slow, lilting melody. Couples drifted onto the dance floor, their movements graceful under the twinkle of lights. Roger watched them for a moment, then turned back to Emily, his heart pounding. "Dance with me," he said. Emily blinked. "Roger, just one," he said, his voice gentle. "No spreadsheets, no deadlines, just us." For a heartbeat, he thought she'd say no. Then she smiled. A real smile, bright and unguarded, and slipped her hand into his. The world narrowed to the warmth of her fingers, the soft sway of music, the glow of lights above them. Roger led her onto the floor, his steps awkward at first, but Emily laughed and guided him, her hand light on his shoulder. They moved slowly, the rhythm easy, and for the first time in years, Roger felt like he belonged somewhere other than behind a desk. "You're not bad," Emily teased, her eyes sparkling. Roger grinned. "You haven't seen my signature move yet." Emily laughed, and the sound wrapped around him like a ribbon. He wanted to bottle it, keep it forever. For a while, they didn't talk. They just moved, the silence between them rich and full. Then Roger spoke, his voice low. "I meant what I said earlier," he murmured. "About missing the point. About you." Emily's gaze lifted to his, her eyes shimmering in the soft light. "Roger, I don't want to waste another Christmas," he said, his throat tight. "Not without you. Not without Sophie. I know I've got a lot to prove, and I'm not asking for answers tonight. But I'm asking for a chance." Emily's breath caught, her lips parting as if to speak. But before she could, Sophie's voice rang out from the edge of the dance floor, bright and irrepressible. Mom, look, they have cupcakes. Emily laughed, the sound shaky but sweet. Duty calls, she said, her eyes lingering on his for a moment longer before she stepped back. Roger watched her go, his heart thudding, hope blooming like a fragile flame. He didn't have all the answers, but he had this moment, and for now that was enough. As the night wound down, Roger helped pack up decorations, his hands busy but his mind humming with possibility. When Emily walked him to the door, the air outside was crisp, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Roger smiled. Thank you for letting me. Emily hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. Merry Christmas, Roger. Roger's chest tightened. Merry Christmas, Emily. And as he walked to his car, the bells from the church down the street began to ring, deep, resonant, full of promise. Chapter 11. Christmas morning together, Roger woke before his alarm, the pale winter light filtering through his blinds like a quiet promise. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the hush of the city outside, feeling the weight of yesterday. The gala, the dance, Emily's smile, settle over him like a warm blanket. He hadn't slept much, but he felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Today was Christmas, and for the first time in a long time he wasn't spending it alone. He dressed quickly, jeans, a soft sweater, boots that still bore traces of yesterday's snow. On impulse, he grabbed the small gift he'd bought late last night, a children's book with a bright cover and a ribbon tied around it. For Sophie. He wasn't sure if it was enough, but he wanted her to know he'd thought of her. The streets were quiet as he drove, the world wrapped in a hush that felt sacred. Snow dusted the rooftops, wreaths hung on doors, and every now and then, he glimpsed families through windows, laughing, hugging, tearing into gifts. For years, scenes like that had felt like something happening on another planet. Today, they felt like an invitation. Emily's house was small but warm, a cottage tucked between two towering maples. Lights twinkled along the eaves, and a wreath with a red bow hung proudly on the door. Roger stood on the porch for a moment, his breath fogging in the crisp air, his heart thudding like a drum. He raised his hand to knock, then the door flew open. Roger! Sophie barreled into him like a pint-sized freight train, her pink pajamas covered in cartoon reindeer. She clutched a stuffed animal in one hand and beamed up at him like he'd just delivered Santa's sleigh. You came, she declared, as if there had been any doubt. Roger laughed, steadying himself. I promised, didn't I? Emily appeared behind her, smiling in that way that made Roger's chest ache. She was in a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed from the warmth inside. Merry Christmas, she said, her voice gentle. Merry Christmas, Roger replied, and for a moment, the words felt like more than a greeting. They felt like a vow. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, and the living room was a riot of color. Wrapping paper strewn across the rug, a tree glittering in the corner, stockings sagging with treats. Roger took it all in, feeling something inside him loosen, something that had been wound tight for years. Come on. Sophie tugged his hand toward the tree. We're opening presents. Roger grinned, letting her drag him to the couch. Emily laughed, settling beside him, and for a moment, Roger felt like he'd stepped into one of his dreams. The good one, the golden one. Only this time it was real. The next hour was chaos in the best way. Sophie tore through gifts with the enthusiasm of a small tornado, squealing over dolls and puzzles and a glittery scarf. Roger handed her his gift with a sheepish smile, and when she ripped off the ribbon and saw the book, her eyes lit up. Mom, look, it's the one with the unicorn, she cried, hugging it to her chest. Emily shot Roger a look, surprised, touched. You didn't have to. I wanted to, Roger said simply. Emily's smile softened, and for a moment, their eyes held quiet, warm, full of something that made Roger's pulse trip over itself. After the gift frenzy, they moved to the kitchen for breakfast. Emily poured coffee while Roger attempted to flip pancakes without recreating yesterday's syrup disaster. Sophie perched on a stool, offering commentary like a tiny food critic. That one's too brown, she announced as Roger slid a pancake onto a plate. Roger grinned. It's called caramelized. Very fancy. Sophie giggled, and Emily shook her head, laughing. You two are trouble. Roger glanced at her, his smile lingering. The best kind. Later, they sprawled in the living room, the fire crackling, the tree lights casting a soft glow. Sophie was absorbed in her new book, her lips moving as she sounded out words. Emily sat curled in an armchair, her hands wrapped around a mug, her gaze drifting to Roger. You didn't have to do this, she said quietly. Spend your Christmas here. Roger met her eyes, his voice steady. I wanted to, more than anything. Emily's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the mug. Roger. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his heart pounding. I know I've got a lot to prove. I know I've spent years putting work first, but I'm done with that. I want this. He gestured around the room. The tree, the fire, Sophie giggling over her book. I want to be part of something that matters. Part of your life. Emily's eyes shimmered, her lips parting as if to speak. But before she could, Sophie looked up and announced, Mom! Roger should come every Christmas. Emily laughed, a sound shaky but sweet. We'll see, sophomore. Roger smiled, his chest tight with hope. I'd like that, he said softly. As the afternoon wore on, Roger helped Emily clear dishes, their hands brushing now and then, sending sparks skittering up his spine. They talked, about childhood memories, about favorite Christmas songs, about the ridiculousness of assembling toys at midnight. The conversation flowed easy, warm, like a river finding its course. When it was time for him to leave, the sky outside was streaked with pink and gold, the kind of sunset that felt like a benediction. Emily walked him to the door, Sophie trailing behind with her unicorn book. Thank you, Emily said softly, for today. Roger smiled, his voice low. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Emily hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. Merry Christmas, Roger. Roger's chest tightened. Merry Christmas, Emily. And as he stepped into the crisp evening air, the bells from the church down the street began to ring, deep, resonant, full of promise. Chapter 12. Looking forward, Roger drove home through streets glittering with frost, his thoughts a tangle of warmth and wonder. The day had been everything he didn't know he needed. Laughter, chaos, quiet moments by the fire. Emily's smile lingered in his mind like a melody, and Sophie's giggles echoed in his ears. For the first time in years, Christmas hadn't felt like an obligation or a hollow ritual. It had felt like life. When he stepped into his apartment, the twinkling lights he'd strung days ago greeted him like old friends. He sank onto the couch, staring at their glow, and let the silence settle. Not the heavy, suffocating silence he'd known before, but a gentle one, full of possibility. He thought of the man he'd been, a workaholic chasing numbers, mistaking success for happiness. He thought of the dreams that had shaken him awake, the past, rich with laughter, the present, vibrant with connection, the future, bleak and then bright. He'd been given a glimpse of what mattered, and now he had a choice. Roger smiled faintly. No, not a choice, a decision, one he'd already made. His phone buzzed, startling him. He grabbed it, half expecting another work email, but it was a message from Emily. Hope you got home safe. Thank you again for today. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you. Roger stared at the words, his chest tightening. He typed back before doubt could creep in. Made it home. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. It meant more than I can say. A pause. Then her reply, it meant a lot to us too. Maybe we could do this again? Not just at Christmas. Roger's breath caught. He read the words twice, 3 times, as if they might vanish if he blinked. Then he smiled. A slow, unstoppable smile, and typed, I'd like that. More than you know. The days that followed were a blur of small, deliberate changes. Roger turned down a last-minute project that would have eaten his weekend. He called his sister for the first time in months. He even bought a real calendar. Not the digital kind, but one with glossy pages and pictures of snowy landscapes, and wrote in bold letters across January, Dinner with Emily. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about showing up, about being present, about building something real one moment at a time. A week later, Roger found himself back at the community center. Not for a gala, not for a charity drive, but for a quiet coffee with Emily while Sophie colored at a nearby table. The hall was empty now, stripped of its holiday finery, but the warmth lingered, in the way Emily laughed, in the way her eyes softened when they met his. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, the absurdity of corporate jargon. Roger told her about the dreams, haltingly at first, then with growing ease. Emily listened, her expression thoughtful, and when he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Sounds like you got a second chance, she said softly. Roger squeezed her fingers, his voice steady. I don't plan on wasting it. As he drove home that evening, the sky was streaked with gold, and the bells from the church down the street began to ring, deep, resonant, full of promise. Roger rolled down his window, letting the sound wash over him, and smiled, because for the first time in years he wasn't looking back. He wasn't even looking at the present. He was looking forward. Chapter 13. Epilogue. Next Christmas. Snow fell in lazy spirals outside the community center windows, frosting the world in white. Inside, the hall was alive with color and laughter. Garlands draped across beams, tables piled high with toys and coats, the scent of cocoa mingling with cinnamon. Volunteers bustled about, their voices bright, their cheeks pink from the cold. At the center of it all stood Roger Brinks, sleeves rolled up, a roll of tape dangling from his wrist like a badge of honor. He was laughing, really laughing, as Sophie perched on a chair beside him, issuing instructions with the authority of a seasoned foreman. No, Roger, she said solemnly, pointing at the box he was wrapping. The bow goes on top, not the side. That's weird. Roger grinned, obediently repositioning the bow. Yes, ma'am, top only. Got it. Emily appeared then, carrying a tray of steaming mugs. Her red sweater was dusted with glitter, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, and when she smiled at Roger, the room seemed to tilt just a little. "Quality control still cracking the whip?" she teased, setting the tray down. Sophie beamed. "Someone has to keep him in line." Roger chuckled, his eyes lingering on Emily. "She's doing a great job." Emily's smile softened, and for a moment, the noise around them faded. The laughter, the music, the rustle of paper. It was just the two of them, standing in the glow of twinkling lights, sharing a look that spoke of everything they'd built in the past year. It hadn't been perfect. There had been late nights, hard conversations, moments when old habits threatened to creep back in. But Roger had kept his promise. He'd shown up, for Emily, for Sophie, for himself. He'd learned to close his laptop, to say no when work tried to swallow him whole, to choose the things that mattered. And Emily had let him in. Slowly at first, cautiously, like someone testing the strength of ice. But as the months passed, trust bloomed, steady and sure. They'd shared dinners, laughter, quiet mornings over coffee. They'd built something real, something Roger had once thought was out of reach. "Hey," Emily said now, her voice low enough that Sophie couldn't hear. "You okay?" Roger smiled, his chest tightening with a warmth that felt like home. "Better than okay." Emily's eyes shimmered, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his. "Merry Christmas, Roger." Roger took her hand, his grip gentle but sure. "Merry Christmas, Emily." Later, as the gala wound down and volunteers packed up the last of the gifts, Roger stepped outside for a breath of cold air. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the velvet sky, and the bells from the church down the street began to ring, deep, resonant, full of promise. He closed his eyes, listening to the sound, and smiled, because this time he wasn't dreaming.